Today I would like to tell you about a ship or two which happened to be at the Battle of Trafalgar, and how maybe, just maybe, their example may have a thing or two to tell us after all this time. The first was HMS Bellerophon. Yes, Lord Sandwich, the First Lord of the Admiralty, consulted a classical dictionary from which to choose, pretty much at random, this name for her when she was to be launched. Bellerophon was the mortal hero of Greek myth who rode Pegasus, the flying horse. But the ordinary crewman could make neither head nor tails of the name, and so they dubbed the ship's figurehead Billy Ruffian. Bellerophon was a third-rate ship of the line, a 74-gun battleship, if you will. She made quite a name for herself. In 1794 she fought at the battle known as the Glorious 1st of June. In 1799 she took part in the Battle of the Nile. Then in 1805 came Trafalgar. Nelson famously split his fleet into two attacking columns, which drove into the French and Spanish line. The famous Heavy Punch was delivered by his van column, led by the first-rate 104-gun Victory, the second-rate 98-gun Temeraire, and the second-rate 98-gun Neptune. A first-rate and two second-rate ships of the line with 300 guns between them. It was a fearsome blow that took to the French flagship, the Bucentaure, and the terrifying Spanish 136-gun giant battleship Santísima de Trinidad. So that was the glamorous end of the battle, led by Nelson himself. But the Lee column also saw plenty of fighting. It was led by Vice Admiral Collingwood's 100-gun first-rate HMS Royal Sovereign, but the ships which followed in her wake carried much less clout. The Belleisle, the Mars, the Tonnant, and the Bellerophon immediately behind her were third-rate ships of the line. The Tonnant carried 80 guns, the others 74. On breaking through the enemy line, the Bellerophon, amid the chaos of her firing broadsides and taking fire from the enemy, collided with the French battleship Aigle. They were both 74-gun third-rate ships of the line. They ended up side by side, their rigging and spars entangled. The French had a greater number of men with firearms aloft on the masts, which caused great trouble on the upper decks of the Bellerophon. The French ship may well have had a superior number of soldiers aboard, because the losses on the Bellerophon's upper decks seemed to have been substantial. On top of that, the French also made great use of explosive grenades, which they tossed onto the deck. Making use of their advantage, they tried to board the Bellerophon, but were beaten off, although with great difficulty. Captain John Cook took 2 bullets to the chest and expired, but not before he had ordered his first lieutenant, William Price Cumby, below with explicit orders to assure the men kept firing the guns. The French had been driven off, but only temporarily. Surely they would regroup and attack once more. No doubt their crew was gathering on the Aigle's upper decks, ready to overwhelm the Bellerophon. When the time came, there would not be much to stand in their way. The British crew had pretty much been forced below, where, true to her captain's orders, the guns were being worked furiously. On the far side, firing on any enemy ship that came into range, and on the near side, blasting into the belly of the Aigle. I believe to recall having heard that they raised the guns to maximum elevation, aiming for their opponent's upper decks, where they thought the enemy to be massing. Realizing the French attack could come at any moment, the men just kept going, ceaselessly working the guns. The French attack never came. Unbeknownst to the British crew, their gunfire was wreaking havoc on the French ship. 2/3 of her crew were either dead or wounded. Desperate to end the carnage, the French managed to free their ship's entanglement with the Bellerophon and draw away from her. But the Aigle did not have much left. The crew of HMS Defiance, another 74-gun third-rate, which had already captured the Spanish Nepomuceno, boarded her and took control. Her upper decks were said to have been a mess from the Bellerophon's desperate barrage. Of course, this was not yet the end of the great Bellerophon's role in history. After his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon fled to the port of Rochefort, hoping to be granted passage to the United States. Bellerophon was already there, blockading the port. On the 13th of July 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte surrendered himself to Britain aboard HMS Bellerophon. But there was yet another ship at Trafalgar, about which you may well have never heard. She was HMS Belleisle. Again, this was a ship in the less glamorous lee column of the British attack. The Belleisle had the misfortune of being the second ship in the column. Collingwood's 100-gun Royal Sovereign could dare to plunge headlong into the enemy line, but Belleisle was a third-rate, sailing into the maw of hell. Royal Sovereign had raced ahead, so Belleisle did not arrive in her wake, but well behind her. The enemy line had thus all the time in the world to prepare for her arrival. She was engaged by, among other ships, the French 74-gun Achille, the 74-gun Aigle, the 80-gun Neptune, the 74-gun Fougueux, the Spanish 112-gun Santa Ana, the 74-gun Monarca, and the 74-gun Nepomuceno. Under such withering fire, she was to find herself completely dismasted. With no sails, she could no longer manoeuvre, and lay dead in the water. More so, with her masts and spars crashed down, her port side was draped in sails, making it impossible to see through her gun ports on that side. But when after 45 minutes, HMS Swiftsure and Polyphemus managed to break through to her, they found Belleisle with no masts or rigging, but with a makeshift flagpole still proudly flying the Union Jack. Throughout it all, she never struck her colours. I guess the moral of the tale is simply never give up. Do not despair. No matter what the odds against you, just hold on. Remember the men of the Belleisle and Bellerophon. You don't need to be the hero of the tale. Yours does not need to be the glamorous column with the flash admiral up ahead. You can be dismasted and wrecked, adrift in a hostile sea. Just hang on in and don't give up on yourself. Now I know it's an easy thing to say. The problem is, life can seem truly insurmountable. I too have at times found despair in my life. I indeed know what it means just to give up. We are all human and can be overwhelmed by events well beyond our control. Yet the men of the Bellerophon and Belleisle remain an example to us all. More often than not in life, what is asked of you is to keep calm and carry on. If you are still standing at the end, it is enough. And if you fear the great blow that will crush you is imminent, then what have you to lose by carrying on, no matter how futile it may appear? Just like the men of Bellerophon, who kept on working their guns, expecting the deadly French attack to come at any moment. So hang on in there, no matter how bleak things seem. For however improbable as it may sound, when the guns fall silent and the smoke clears, you may in fact turn out to be on the winning side. After all, it happened to the Belleisle. Now for a bonus fact. Another ship in Collingwood's less glamorous lee column was HMS Tonnant. An 80-gun third-rate ship of the line, she was originally a French ship, which was captured by the British at the Battle of the Nile. The Tonnant had run aground amid the battle, but continued to fight off all comers. Her captain, Aristide Aubert de Petit-Thouars, lost an arm and both legs, yet heroically continued to command his ship, propped up in a barrel of wheat, until he died from blood loss. Prior to Trafalgar, for a while, the ship was commanded by none other than Sir Edward Pellew. At Trafalgar, she was the fourth ship in the column, behind Belleisle, Mars, and ahead of the Bellerophon. In fierce fighting, she captured the French 74-gun Algeciras. But like Bellerophon, the Tonnant should have another brush with history. In 1814, she joined the British fleet in the War of 1812 against the United States. There she came to serve as the flagship of Admiral Sir Alexander Cochrane. It was aboard the Tonnant that the two Americans, Colonel John Stuart Skinner and the lawyer Francis Scott Key, dined with the British Vice Admiral and his staff as they sought to negotiate the release of a prisoner, Dr. William Beans. The British agreed to release the man, but insisted that, given that the Americans now had knowledge of the units in the British fleet and were aware of British plans, they could return to their own ship but could not yet return to Baltimore. Therefore, Skinner, Key and Beans were witnesses of the British attack on Fort McHenry. Francis Scott Key also just so happened to be a poet, and seeing his nation's flag flying defiantly throughout the night's bombardment inspired him. The poem Defense of Fort McHenry was published a week later. The poem was later adapted to the song known as To Anacreon in Heaven. The song, with these new lyrics, came to be known as the Star-Spangled Banner, the American national anthem. Thus, the Tonnant was present both at Trafalgar, when the Belleisle refused to strike her colours, and at Baltimore, when Fort McHenry defied the enemy under fierce bombardment. In both these great cases of defiance, the Tonnant witnessed the key to fame was not striking some great blow, not leading some glorious charge, but just hanging on in there, holding on for another day, still standing at the end of it. Who knows? Sometimes even a few old ships can teach us a thing or two. That is all from the cyberpast for now. Thank you very much, and goodbye.